a great looking group. So welcome. I know we'll move through these 3 hours. It will seem like it's only 3 minutes. So welcome aboard, everybody. Thank you. Pass it back to you.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again for giving us 3 hours. Just to go over some of our typical instructions, particularly for those who are viewing. A reminder that we have closed captions both in English as well as in Spanish. English closed captions are available within Zoom and YouTube. Users can follow this link to view both English and Spanish captions in a separate browser window. Next slide, please. Just a reminder of how you may access our closed caption. At the bottom middle of your screen, you should see a menu of options. If you can't see the menu, hover your mouse over the bottom middle of the screen, then click on the CC icon and a separate window with captions will appear. Next slide, please. Again, we have ASL interpretation. Thank you for being here today, Aaron. In the effort to continue to center equity, there is an ASL interpreter in addition to closed captioning. To make sure the interpreter is always visible, please right-click the video and select Spotlight Video. For those watching on YouTube, when we screen share, you will be able to see the slideshow, closed captioning, and the ASL interpreter. You will still be able to hear different people speaking, but may not see them. Next slide. Reminder for our webinar participants, a few tips. Again, thank you for joining us. Please join audio by either phone or computer, not both. This will help to reduce the level of feedback. We encourage panelists to turn on your video to the degree that you all feel comfortable. As we continue to be in this virtual setting, it really helps to make a much more intimate meeting. Please keep your audio on mute when not speaking. If you experience technical difficulties, please contact our program staff at 360-329-6744. Next slide, please. Just a reminder for public input, there will be an opportunity to provide brief public input later in the meeting today, roughly around 5:45 p.m. To dial in by phone, please dial 1-669-900-6833. You'll want to include our meeting ID at 993-5459-6043, passcode 674942. You'll want to dial *9 to raise your hand. After you are invited to speak, dial *6 to unmute yourself. Next slide. And to submit public comment after the meeting, please fill out the comment form on the program website or email your comments to info@interstatebridge.org with CAG Public Comment in the subject line. You may also call 360-859-0494 for Washingtonians, or 503-897-9218 for Oregonians, or you may call our 800 number at 1-888-503-6735. Please do state CAG Public Comment in your message. Written comments need to explicitly say CAG Public Comment in the subject line or in the body of the message for them to be identified and distributed to CAG members. All written comments must be received prior to 48 hours in advance of each upcoming meeting in order to be distributed to advisory group members. Comments received after that point will be distributed to members in advance of their next meeting. Next slide. And Jason, I know you wanted to take a moment to talk a little bit about the public comment protocol. So why don't we do that, and then I'll cover the rest of this.
Great. Thank you, Johnell. Just in response to a number of community members who have asked about the public commenting process and its functionality, we just wanted to let everybody know that we have heard you, and we are at the program taking steps to make it a little easier folks to participate and provide public comment. One of the comments was the lack of time that the instructions were up on the screen. So just for folks who are watching and or for our CAG members, just for your education, the instructions are on the Community Advisory Group webpage, on the IBR webpage, as well as in the description of the YouTube video for folks that are watching along. So you can always find the instructions to provide public comment. In the coming months and or maybe even weeks, we hope to update the full process to make it a bit easier for people to dial in. So just want to let you know we have heard you and we are responding.
Great. Thank you, Jason. And just a reminder of our commitments, operating norms. It's important for us to put relationships first, for us to keep our focus on our common goal, which of course is to replace the interstate bridge, for us to be mindful of the power dynamics in the room, for us to create a space for multiple truths and norms, to be kind and brave, for us to practice examining racially biased systems and processes, and for us to continue to look for learning. Next slide. Again, our meeting agenda, again, welcome. We'll receive a program update here in just a moment from our, actually, you know what? Mr. Washington, I'm heading this back over to you for you to review what our agenda is. Ed?
Still on mute, Ed.
Sorry about that. I'd like to welcome everybody again, because some of you were probably not on when we welcomed you the first time. So thank you so very, very much for your time and everything that you have given and are giving and will continue to give to this program. But our agenda today, we'll have a program update, and then we're going to also talk about the March 24th CAG Hayden Island Marine Drive feedback. We'll be looking at transit investment winnowing and also transit investment discussion and breakout sessions where you have the opportunity to express yourselves. We're going to be looking at the auxiliary lane presentation and having a discussion on that. And then we'll have what's next, public comment and wrap up. So I'll pass it back to the next slide, please.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. I want to say another thank you to all the participants in the community advisory group. This is not easy. We're asking a lot of your time, and now we're asking for another hour added on to your time. So thank you so much for sticking with us and being a part of this. So first off, I'd like to cover the event yesterday where Senator Cantwell came to town, and we had a lot of folks at the base of the bridge. We got great coverage, both in the Portland market as well as in the Seattle market. And that's very, very good for the program, because this is more than just a local program. This does have statewide and regional as well as coastal implications. So Senator Cantwell did a fantastic job of describing some of the funding opportunities that are available. So it was overall a very successful event, and Sam did a fantastic job of describing his role as a member of the community advisory group and the work that's being done and the involvement of the community voice. So a very good event yesterday. So we have been talking to a number of folks. This, as a matter of fact, just before I joined this meeting, I was talking to a number of business groups or business owners about this program, and they did a fantastic thing where they brought in some mega project managers from across the country. Some of the mega projects are complete, some are still underway, but it was a great conversation about the pitfalls and the success routes to get to projects. So we listened very carefully and took some good notes. So, but I'm not going to take up a whole bunch of time, but I do want to talk about an issue that is that comes up intermittently, and it's about the locally preferred alternatives. So if we can go to a slide, and there's a lot of conversation around what is this and how does this fit into the overall process. And so the best way to do this is to tell you that the locally preferred alternative, or we have also called it the IBR solution, what it is the early agreement by all of the transportation entities, by the executive steering group entities, by the community advisory group, the equity advisory group, an alignment on what we are going to take into the next phase to be studied. It is not the final decision. It is what we are taking to be studied. So it's a high-level identification of the foundational components of an alternative, such as transit mode, alignment of the bridge, other improvements, such as how many auxiliary lanes, what Hayden Island interchange will look like. All of these are foundational components that we have to reach alignment on to take to be studied. Now, what this is not, it is not a fully defined alternative evaluated in the SEIS. So our conceptual design will start digging in deeper to look at what other things will need to be in that fully defined alternative. It is not a final design. These are right now concepts that will be refined through a process. So we will be looking at, okay, what type of bridge, and we may get to 30% by the end of the supplemental environmental impact statement. We may be at 10%. So these are not final designs that we are talking about, but this gets us steps closer to getting to a final design. This is also not the end of technical analysis. So we will be continually looking at data, looking at other things that have impacts on this corridor. So we are looking to make sure that what we take into that next phase, if there are fatal flaws that exist, the next phase will expose those fatal flaws, and we can course correct during that time period, during that very public supplemental environmental impact statement process. And this is not a final approval. So there will be plenty of opportunities for the community advisory group, the equity advisory group, the executive steering group to weigh in on more issues that arise as we are digging deeper into what this recommendation to carry forward is. So with that, I'll take any questions that you may have either on this or any other issues that you feel are appropriate for me. Oh, you guys are easy. You must have ate a good meal before this meeting. You're too satisfied. Well, thank you so much. This is, once again, this is going to be a very informational packed presentation, and we'll have some good opportunities for breakout groups to have some intimate discussions. So I see one hand up. Tom.
So this is not necessarily a question for you specifically, but I don't know if I'm going to get an opportunity to bring it up later. I had a conversation with a guy who represents a bunch of the business interests on Hayden Island, and he wanted me to make sure that I kind of had the opportunity to speak their viewpoint. And I don't know if you want to hear that right here, right now, or is there a better place?
No, this is an appropriate time.
Okay. The basic premise of their viewpoint is that all in all, the business interests on Hayden Island have a preference for the full interchange option because that gives them the best access for their customers and for freight and deliveries to and from the island. However, they do understand the concerns about keeping the footprint of the bridge to a minimum as a livability issue for the residents of Hayden Island. And so as such, they don't have any problem with the access from Vancouver, but they're very concerned about the partial interchange access from Oregon to and from Hayden Island. And this is something the Bridgeton community had noticed as well, that we have concerns not so much for ourselves, but for the fact that freight deliveries to and from the island have to go through a very convoluted set of roundabouts according to the current sketch, that will be very discouraging for freight traffic and business traffic to and from the island.
Understood. And we have some folks.
The gist of it.
We have some folks who are taking notes, and we know both scenarios have pluses and minuses and trade-offs. So those are the things that, as we make a recommendation, we do recognize that there will be some trade-offs. We don't want to harm the business community on Hayden Island, but we also want to be respectful of the residents who have told us that the current footprint and the convoluted ramp entrances and exits are very detrimental to life on the island. So we will be looking at these issues, and this will not be the last opportunity as we move towards a recommendation for input to make it better. So I saw, let me see, I see Jana's hand up. So Jana.
Thank you. I hadn't decided whether or not I wanted to speak out about the roundabouts yet, but that roundabouts continue to be an issue for heavy trucks. And there's going to be a lot of truck traffic in most of the plans that I've taken a look at. And so the design of the roundabout and the number of them is of concern to our industry. And so we'll look forward to working with you to try to minimize the impact on that. We just had an incident within the last week where a truck rolled over in one of Oregon's roundabouts. I mean, that it's not an infrequent occurrence. So we need to be very, very careful with that. And we tend to oppose them on freight routes in general, and you've got a lot of freight traffic there. So just keep that in mind.
Understood. So we will be looking at the best and the most current roundabout designs, if a roundabout is to be a part of it. Right now, these are still conceptual. These are not final designs, so we don't know if the final design will contain roundabouts. But if they do, we will make sure that they are built to the most robust and modern standards, to where if we're asking freight traffic to utilize them, that freight traffic will not have an issue crossing through these roundabouts.
So Greg, I saw Irina's hand was up. I just wanted to see if that wasn't intentional. Okay.
Oh.
All right.
That was an accident. It was just popping on my page and I was like putting it on and off.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that there wasn't interest in you also asking a question.
Well, Irina, you've changed your hairstyle. I hardly recognized you. It looks nice. So do we have any other questions or concerns for me before we jump into starting the informational part of the CAG? Seeing none, I will, Jason, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Greg. And Lisa, I believe you are up for our next discussion.
Well, I think Tom and Jana did such a nice job of starting to introduce the Hayden Island Marine Drive feedback. And that's really what we hope to ensure that we were reflecting with you. Based on our last meeting, we really dedicated time and space to this particular topic. What I thought was, from my perspective, listening to the conversations in the small breakout group that I was in, there was just a tremendous interest by this group to ensure that both the voices of the residents and the businesses on Hayden Island were heard. And I think we've already heard that tonight. And then secondly, that the freight community also had an active voice in reviewing the plans and providing feedback. So I just want to say that I think overall, those messages were very clearly heard by the program. Jason, if you can go to the next slide. Some of the other key points that we wanted to make sure that when we went through the Jamboard and took a look at the feedback that was shared as the full group and then in the small breakout groups, that these were some of those high level points that the community advisory group wanted to express. So continuing to make decisions based on data. The option that reduces traffic congestion the most is what should be built. Active transportation safety and access should be considered. Keeping the commercial and freight industry up to date and hearing their concerns should be ongoing. And the size of the bridge footprint over Hayden Island should be considered a major component of the design. And I think you heard from Greg that this is one of those key elements that is part of the way in which we're looking at the locally preferred alternative. So I want to open up the space to see, are there any comments or any other questions? Maybe even any feedback if this slide doesn't capture all of what was shared during our last session. We would love to modify it to make sure that we're ensuring what you said is being heard and documented. Tom.
I just want to point out that in all the discussions I have, whether it be the people that live here or the business owners, there is a confusion, I guess, on the term congestion versus travel time. And I think most of the people I talk to are equating the two, yet I don't believe in the IBR program that they're equated at all. I think we are focusing on congestion and travel time is not an issue. Is that how you see it?
That's a great comment, Tom. Actually, we have heard a little bit of even just the values document, making sure that we're clear on what the answer to congestion means. I'm going to see, I don't know, Greg, if you're still available, if you want to try and respond to Tom's question. If not, I did see my friend Ryan LaProuse turn on his video. I don't know, Ryan, if you are interested in trying to respond to this question or if we want to follow back up with Tom and the CAG in 2 weeks.
We could do either, whichever you like, Lisa. I mean, congestion, travel time, they're somewhat related, Tom, but travel time is very important and will be summarized as well. So congestion is an indication at a specific location. So you can kind of summarize hours of congestion, but travel time is from point A to point B. So it's slightly different, but they're both very important and will be considered for the IBR program.
And I would just point out that if you could, for the sake of the public and all, that you somehow add travel time to our considerations.
Okay, noted. Thank you, Ryan. Other questions, other thoughts, comments, feedback? It is a quiet group today. Okay. Well, we have had the opportunity to talk about transit, and Kelly Bedridge has been with us before to introduce our transit investments, and she's here again today to start talking about how those transit options are being narrowed down, winnowed down into kind of some final selections to take into this next phase of planning. So Kelly.
Thanks, Lisa. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for letting me spend some time with you on this sunny-ish afternoon. As Lisa mentioned, I'll be sharing some information. Some of it's information that you've seen before, because I want to make sure that we continue to have some context for the conversation, some shared context, and then also a bit more sort of diving more deeply into the mode conversation in particular for transit. So if we could go to the next slide. As you may recall from the previous meeting, we did provide some information about the various options that we've spent some time looking into, as well as the measures that we used in order to understand how those options might operate in comparison to each other. And then also some really important conversations about what's changed since 2013. And in this instance, the reference to 2013 is when the previous program, which was referred to as the CRC program, when that ended. And so when that ended, there were a number of things that have been done at the local level that we want to make sure that we're thinking about as we think about a future investment. And we have talked before about some of the findings from those measures. And then today we want to dive a little bit more deeply into your thoughts. And as we move towards trying to get to a more focused list of considerations in particular around mode. So if we could go to the next slide. This is just a quick review of the representative transit investments. And these first pieces I'll go through pretty quickly because you have seen it before, but I also understand that it's important to bring things back so that we have them top of mind when we dive into the discussion. So next slide. We did develop a total of 11 representative transit investments. And again, this is sort of a high level opportunity to define specific investments so that we can understand how they might operate in relation to each other. So each one of those investments included an assumption about mode and the alignment, as well as a terminus, some general station locations, and also general information about park and ride size and location. And it's important to note that at the time when there is a preferred option that is identified for transit, there'll be a whole bunch more work that's done in order to refine that particular option and really dig into exactly what it will look like. And that's some of what Greg was speaking to earlier. Again, this is just that high level glance to understand how various investments might operate in regard to each other. So the next slide. So here is a quick overview of the measures that we looked at. So we had each of those options, those investment opportunities, and then for each of them, we developed a number of sort of data points to understand how they might work within the built environment. And so this includes things like ridership in 2045, understanding how people might get to a given station given a given investment. So thinking about walking and transferring and park and ride access. We also dug into understanding a little bit more about access in particular for equity priority communities, and then a high level assessment of capital costs and operations and maintenance costs relative to each other. Next slide, please. In addition, we had really important conversations again about what's happened since 2013. So when the previous program did not move forward, in Clark County, CTRAN and the City of Vancouver have really done some really important work that needs to be in our minds as we think about what's changed since we've had this conversation. So the next slide. Really important and big change is that CTRAN has now developed and begun to implement their Vine BRT network. So they have one line that's in operation, one line that's in construction, and another one in planning. And so really wanting to be mindful of those investments and making sure that a future high capacity transit investment helps to really augment that already very successful service in a way that creates new connections and really maintains those opportunities that have already been built. This is sort of an additional point here is that the City of Vancouver and CTRAN have developed robust stations on Broadway and Washington. And so again, wanting to make sure that we're aware of that and able to keep those connections whole while also providing new opportunities with a new investment. Next slide. In addition, as I'm sure you all know, the City of Vancouver has seen substantial growth in the waterfront district, and there's a real interest to try and serve that new development with this investment. And in general, the population of Clark County has really grown substantially since 2010, adding about 78,000 people, with a very large percent of them are people of color. So lots of new growth and diversification. So when we think about those measures that we identified, those sort of 16 metrics that we looked at for each of the options, we start to see some high-level takeaways. So we'll share that with you here. First, all of the options have a really substantial improvement in service over not doing anything. So we'll kind of talk about the no build, and that is that we create an option where we still move forward in time to 2045, but the project is not built. And then we use that as sort of a way to measure the added benefit of a project that is built. So that's what the no build is when we refer to that. There's a large demand for cross river transit. And there's a lot of questions and things that we really need to dig into once we pick a preferred option in regard to capacity, thinking about capacity within the region, both in sort of downtown Vancouver and downtown Portland, as well as thinking about the existing light rail infrastructure and how these types of investments are really meant to help bolster the overall systems, and just needing to be mindful of what that means within the built environment. In addition, a transit investment that serves the markets really needs to take into account all of those existing services. So thinking about the existing C-Tran Express bus services, the existing and future BRT, and also the existing and future LRT opportunities within the TriMet system. When we look at how folks are accessing this transit investment in the future, it's really a lot of folks are coming from the existing transit service. So again, wanting to be really mindful of how we make existing service even better and how this is an opportunity to make all of those connections as sort of meaningful and successful as possible. And that last bullet there is just to say, when we created at a very high level a couple of different options, there are a few options where the alignment is the same, the station locations are the same, the park and ride assumptions are the same, and the only difference is the mode, meaning light rail or BRT, and sort of the frequency of that. And in general, when we have those that are very similar, we are seeing more ridership on the light rail options than on the BRT options. And we'll dive into the reasons why in just a moment. The modeling also shows that there's a large demand for park and ride, and in particular for folks that are traversing I-5 and wanting to have a sort of quick access to park and ride, and that options that include more stations serve more residents within walking distance, including BIPOC and low-income populations, and that all the transit investments improve access to jobs, including BIPOC and low-income populations. And in general, the light rail investments provide a bit more access, and that has to do a bit with travel time and assumptions about transfers, which we'll again dive into in just a moment. But it really has to do with that travel time, which is something that Tom mentioned earlier. Travel time is something that's important for all modes, right? It's something that we really think about when we consider how we traverse a given area. So it matters here too. And then again, when we compare the same representative alignment, so again, it's the same alignment, it has the same stations, the same park and ride, light rail tends to have a higher capital cost, but a lower operations cost per rider than BRT options. So with that in mind, the desire is to start to sort of winnow the discussion about which of the elements of an investment sort of make the most sense for this particular alignment and solve the particular issues as identified within the purpose and need of the project. So we can go to the next slide. As we've mentioned here quickly, we spent a lot of time sort of gathering a lot of information about investments and understanding how they might perform and getting a deeper understanding of where we're at as a region and what the folks in Clark County, at the city, at C-Tran have done since 2013 when the previous program ended, so that we can kind of understand what's changed in terms of finding the right solution for the region. And we've also been able to do some high-level conceptual design so that we can also sort of understand how any of these investments might actually fit within the given region, because that's really important too. Is how would this work within the plans for the local jurisdictions? Next slide. So here we're going to dive a little bit more deeply into a discussion of mode. So as you may recall from the previous slides, we sort of looked at 3 different potential modes. And so one of the options we looked at was a standalone bus on shoulder option. So the only investment that would be made would be an opportunity to accommodate bus on shoulder within the bridge influence area. And then we also looked at other options that included bus rapid transit investments and or light rail investments, because we actually had one that was a hybrid that had an extension of BRT to Hayden Island and an extension of light rail. So these are this is sort of the universe of modes that we looked at. So the first thing to talk about a little bit is that as we evolve this conversation and we're really thinking about the right investment for the region, what ended up happening is that while we looked at a standalone bus on shoulder option, it ended up that all of the build options accommodate accommodate the bus on shoulder. So any light rail option, any BRT option, including that hybrid BRT and LRT option, all assume that there would be the infrastructure that's necessary to accommodate bus on shoulder. And so for the purposes of the conversation today, sort of wanting to talk about removing that standalone BRT or standalone bus on shoulder option because it's already accommodated in all the other options. And so then, if that makes sense, and of course we'll talk about that in more detail, then that sort of leaves us with two options, which are BRT and LRT. And so just like there's some similarities to the conversation way back in 2008 when we were selecting a locally preferred alternative for the previous program and now, and there's also some differences. So I think it's important to be mindful of all of those. So one of the things that's true about, I sort of want to get everyone to focus on not necessarily thinking about just the mode, but thinking about the specific corridor that we're addressing and the issues that we're trying to solve for this particular place and time. Because again, both light rail and BRT, I think, are important tools in the toolbox of transportation. And it's really a question of which tool makes the most sense to apply in a given situation. So one of the things that's different between the two is that light rail typically in this region typically operates in a 2-car consist. And within those 2 cars, you can carry up to 266 passengers. And for BRT, the assumption is that you could carry up to 100 passengers, depending sort of on the configuration of the bus itself. And so that's one of the things that's different is the capacity. So another thing to think about is that for the purposes of development of the potential investments that we dove into in this process, we do assume that all of the options make their way to the Yellow Line Expo station, which means that BRT options would traverse the river if they were headed south, would traverse the river in a dedicated facility. And then anybody who was trying to go further south would make a transfer to the Max Yellow Line. And if it were a light rail investment, it would be an extension of the existing Yellow Line into Vancouver. And so for those options where we are assuming bus rapid transit, there is some additional travel time that is built in because anybody who's traveling further south or further north, depending on the direction that you're traveling, there is an additional transfer that would be necessary in order to make that trip. So that's not true for everyone because some folks are just traveling within Vancouver. Some people aren't sort of crossing that threshold of Expo, but for those that are, those trips have an additional travel time. And so you'll see that that is part of the impact on ridership as we look at those options. Next slide. So this is another piece of the analysis where I'm sort of drawing us back to what we saw in 2008 and also casting us forward to where we are today. So in the 2008 analysis, there was a difference in ridership between light rail and BRT. And we continue to see that there's that difference. And what it really comes down to, again, is that transfer. And so sort of it's the travel time and sort of the attractiveness of making those longer trips. That's something that factors into people's choices around mode for making their trip. And so again, all of the BRT options do assume that additional transfer, and it does have a negative impact. And the other thing to keep in mind that's different from 2008, as opposed to looking at options now, is that C-Trend has a very successful express bus network. And so in 2008, there wasn't an assumption about an express bus that went from downtown Vancouver to downtown Portland. And now there is. And so for those trips between those two largest markets, which is downtown Vancouver to downtown Portland, we are seeing that for BRT options, because there is that additional travel time, more of the 2045 riders are attracted to taking that express bus than the BRT. So that's also part of that delta between the ridership that we're seeing on light rail options versus BRT options. And I know that that's sort of like 3 layers of thought, so I'm happy to peel that apart. But I think that that's sort of the general concept, is that there's an option assumed that folks can take a bus between downtown Vancouver and downtown Portland, and folks are more often attracted to that option as opposed to making a transfer at Expo. All right, next slide, please. So when thinking about the specific needs, again, of this particular investment in this particular corridor, there's some considerations that we've heard from you and I want to like bring these up as part of this narrowing process or as part of this discussion process. And so this is, again, the desire to maximize the capacity on transit across the river. How many people can we encourage to make that mode shift or to choose that mode? Again, really thinking about opportunities to preserve the CTRAN Vine current and future system. We've heard that a lot from so many folks within this group that, you know, the Vine is really a great investment and will continue to be a great investment. So we really need to be mindful that this isn't like an either or, this is an and. And so how do we keep that system whole and continue to be successful, and also build an opportunity to make things even better? And then also that competitive, attractive travel time compared to other choices, which is one of the things that Tom mentioned earlier. I think travel time might be our like secret word today. We're going to say it a lot of times. And then also there has been discussions from some folks about the competitiveness for FTA discretionary funding. And this was part of a conversation from the previous program and continues to be part of the conversation, but wanting to see if there's opportunities for this region to get some of those federal funds that have become even more available in the not so over the last few months, I guess, at this point. And then I just have one other slide, and that was I wanted to use the exact same words that were summarized in the previous meeting in terms of takeaways, because I sort of editorialized on the previous slide. And so this was more specifically what came out of that meeting. So again, I just think it's helpful. Words are really important, and I want to make sure that you all have an opportunity to create the exact words that you want to convey in regard to this conversation. And so these were the words that were on that slide. And so I think it's important to keep that continuity. All right. So with that, I think I'm handing it back to Jason.
You certainly can. Thank you, Kelly. That was a lot of information very quickly, and we are even a bit ahead of our prescribed schedule. So that's well done. So we certainly have time for raised hands, and I see Tom, you've got first floor. Okay, let's, Tom, you want to try that one more time?
You're gonna have to give me, I'm having feedback and jitters here, so I'll try again later.
Why don't we go to the next person? I think Martha, and then Tom Hickey, and then Tom Gentry. As you work on your feedback, I will come back to you. So Martha.
Yeah, I noticed that, I noticed that in this last presentation, she talked about the no build alternative being leaving the existing bridge as is. And I thought that we had decided the no build alternative was the CRC. So is that, did I misunderstand that somewhere?
That's a great question. And so maybe I'll use slightly different words to explain what I think I'm saying, and then please ask for clarification. So when we look at a specific transit investment and we sort of forecast to the future, which in this case is 2045. The no build option is assumes all of the other investments that are assumed in the regional plans occur, and that one investment, which in this case is the program, does not occur. And so that's to sort of hold the rest of the future the same. And the only thing that doesn't happen is that this project does not get built. And that's to really isolate the assumed benefits of this program. And because this is a little, I'm a transit planner, and so this is a little different than what I'm used to, because as you mentioned, it includes multiple investments in terms of all of the modes, but it assumes that we wake up in 2045 and this project didn't get built, but everything else moved forward. Does that make sense?
Thank you. It does. Will we be using that same no build definition in other areas of the project, or is this only for transit?
I'll let Ryan. Ryan, do you want to talk about no build a little bit and maybe use better words than I did?
I think your words were good, Kelly. I missed the initial question. I missed when you said no build early. I missed that portion, but yes, you are correct, Martha. The way she was explaining it is no build assumes other planned projects in the region. So in the regional transportation plan has programs and projects such as the Rose Quarter project. Some other projects are included in there. So those are in the no build, and then we take our project out, take out the IBR program out of it. So you have a with and without. So the only difference is our project's added in versus when it's not in there. So there is a no build that's used in traffic, in transit, and other impact analysis as a comparison.
And I think, Ryan, I think to clarify Martha's point, it's the same no build when we're talking about transit as when we're talking about traffic.
That is correct.
Thank you. And I had another question, and you talked about the ridership difference projected on LRT versus BRT. Is there someplace I can read more about that?
Yes, there certainly is. And I believe that we will be providing some follow-up information so that you can have that those pieces of data as you're thinking about this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Tom Hickey, we'll go to you, and then Tom Gentry, we'll try you back, and then Marcus, I see your hand is up as well.
I was only going to comment on Tom Gentry's feedback being probably because he had two separate logins, and he's closed one, so it should be fine.
Great. Tom Gentry, you want to try again?
Yes, I would like to. And thank you, Tom Hickey. I'm concerned because we're data driven and we continue to give the statistics on the increase in the populations for Clark County. I know where you got the information. It was from a quick stat from the US Census Bureau. But if you do a deeper dive, you will find that number that you're giving is totally wrong. The population did increase by 77,948 in Clark County from 2010 to 2020, but the white alone category increased by 70,091, which is 89.1%. If you look at the quick stat that you took, and if you look at any of the government entities that do a deeper dive, or if you look at the Census Bureau's basis for that one, you'll find that that number is wrong. And I hope we support equity completely, but to go forward with that number and to continue after we brought it up many times causes me a lot of concern. I've asked for that number before and I did not get it. So I have researched it and I know exactly where that number came from. And if you do the deeper dive, you'll see that the increase, if you were to go by your number, you would say that the increase from 2010 to 2020 in the white alone was 6%. And it wasn't, it was 89%. So I am very concerned about this number.
Tom, I know you have brought this up before, and we have gone back to our equity team and our analysis team and I know you provided us with some numbers, and so did Sam Kim. We have done the research as well and tried to recreate the numbers you came up with and couldn't quite, but our team did go back and verify the numbers. And in fact, Jake War, who presented the numbers to you initially, will be here later, but they are 100% that their numbers are correct. And so I will follow up with you individually to talk about these numbers, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So, but I appreciate you bringing it back up, though.
Okay, thank you. We have Marcus and then Sam Kim.
Well, actually, thank you. Actually, my question had to do with something I heard Kelly say. It's also about the numbers. It's also about equity. You had mentioned that once the light rail goes across the river, it provides access more to the waterfront district. And then I think in the same sentence you said, and the growth, and I thought you said the growth in the waterfront district area was a very, very diverse growth and high equity, high people of color. And I wanted to know, was that number that you were speaking about, was it the overall growth of Vancouver was a high equity, or just that waterfront district? I wanted to know if the data need to be disaggregated. And part of that is because I have other concerns about who gets served by the train and by the light rail and where it stops. But for now, if you could answer that question, were you saying that the growth on the waterfront was that very diverse growth you were talking about, or was it for overall for the city of Vancouver growth?
Thank you for that question. And so I believe that there's sort of two pieces to the answer. So one piece was the what's changed since 2013, and that was specific to say that there has been substantial growth within the waterfront district, and there's a desire to serve that with the HCT investment, the high capacity transit investment. Just period. There's a desire to serve it. Not in my presentation, there wasn't any detail about the demographics of folks there, just to say that there's a lot of development and a desire to serve it. And then the other piece was to highlight the growth that has occurred in Clark County in general. It wasn't tied to any specific potential station area or location. It was about Clark County as a whole.
Okay, so okay, that helps me. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Sam?
Back to Mr. Tom Gentry's question, Jason, would it be possible for Tom and I, and maybe Marcus, if is interested, to meet with the person who provided the data? Because I know you sent me the data, and I like to just work off the same set of data, because I think once that's done and once we do the calculations, we would all be aligned. And I would hate for this to continue to come up and be questioned. So I think it's important that we do address this, but offline, and then come to the right number, a right conclusion. Would that be okay with you, Tom Gentry?
Yeah, thank you, Sam, and we'll figure out a way to not only make everybody, you guys, aware, but everybody here aware. So we don't want to do it in a vacuum. We want to make sure that everybody is aware. Just like we had other things come up, we'll make sure that everybody is running from the same numbers. So absolutely, we'll do that.
Great. Other questions from members of CAG? Comments? I know we threw a lot at you. Okay, hearing or seeing none. Jason, I'm going to turn it back over to you to, I think, frame our next piece here.
Yeah, absolutely. And what is actually on our next piece, we're about 10 minutes ahead of schedule, but what we'll do is we'll shift. We are going to take a break for about 15 minutes. You guys, as we extended our meeting to 3 hours, we heard you loud and clear. Let's not all sit here for 3 hours. So we're going to take a break. It's 3:58. We'll come back at 4:13. And we will get ourselves into breakout groups to ask you more, to weigh in more on the transit investments that we heard about, and also talk more about our values and priorities. So thank you all for being here, and we'll see you in 15 minutes.
Hi, everyone. It looks like we're all coming back together. We may have had some transition to their phone, and those that had other conflicts be able to join us now. So our plan at this point is to transition into breakout groups. And as I understand it, there'll be 4 groups. Jason, yes, 4 groups.
There will.
Okay.
Sorry. But
it's hard to make eye contact on film.
Were you looking at me?
Yeah, do you
couldn't tell. Before we do break out into groups, because we still are ahead of schedule, just for a minute, I want to go back to the conversation that we were having with Tom and Sam, and Jake War from our equity team is here with us and is going to participate in our breakout groups. But Jake is here who wants to provide a bit more context to the numbers that we have been putting out. So Jake, would love for you to give a bit of an explanation. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Jason. And I wasn't here for the earlier conversation, so hopefully I'm addressing what I think the issue is based on what I've seen previously and heard previously. I believe that the numbers, the reason for the discrepancy in the numbers is the definition of white versus BIPOC. And because the census separates out race and ethnicity, and the only options for ethnicity are Hispanic Latino or not Hispanic Latino, if you just select white for the race and all who, regardless of what ethnicity they selected, you're going to include people who selected white and Hispanic Latino in that total. So that's going to be higher than if you have a BIPOC definition that includes people who selected Hispanic Latino for their ethnicity. So that 86% that is for one thing, I saw that the source that I believe folks were using was Quick Facts. There's a discrepancy there between what's on Quick Facts and what the raw census data actually shows. But putting that aside, the percentage of white is going to be much higher if you're including folks who are Hispanic Latino who also selected white. So that's going to affect the numbers for the growth. But if you use the BIPOC definition that includes Hispanic Latino, the growth is 76% in Clark County over the last 10 years. And that is also coincidentally 76% of the population growth that has occurred over those 10 years. So I provided Jason with a full detailed written explanation and a table that shows those numbers. Happy to provide that for anyone who missed it. But that is we've checked these over and over. This is accurate information. I see that Sam had a question.
Well, I did, but I was going to suggest that those numbers be provided to at least Mr. Tom Gentry.
We will get them. We'll get them out to this group so everybody can see what we're talking about. Thank you.
Great.
And thank you, Jake.
Yeah, no problem.
Tom Gentry, looks like you might have an additional question here.
Yes, I understand you're going to get the numbers out. I can give you those numbers exactly. But I think we need to have a discussion about the accuracy of those numbers. And even though the census says that Hispanic is counted twice and that some white are counted in mutual, if we look at the white alone percentage, I think that we need to go look at these. So I would like to have a discussion with it about this before we put this out as true and correct. So if I could meet with the person offline or something.
Happy to do so.
Numbers go to the CAG.
Happy to do so. I just want to reiterate that white alone, that term means they only selected white as their race. They could have selected Hispanic Latino for their ethnicity or not Hispanic Latino for their ethnicity. So when that comparison of BIPOC is everyone except those who selected white alone and not Hispanic Latino. Happy to discuss further, but these are accurate numbers.
Yeah, so I'd like to suggest that after we get the numbers, that the interested people, certainly Mr. Tom Gentry and myself, meet with you to go over that and the process and so forth. So I hope that's acceptable to Mr. Gentry and Mr. Jake Moore.
Yep, happy to do it.
Thank you.
I think what might be helpful is Jason can certainly, if others are interested in participating in that conversation, if you want to reach out, I think that would be helpful. You know, we've done more than one session like this where we've been able to kind of dive into a little bit more of the materials and the data. We do value data. We want to make sure that we have the time and space with you to explain the data. And we need to bring it back, as Jason has mentioned, to the full group in a public setting to make sure that we're resolving exactly what it is that we're looking at, making sure that we're all using the same data set. So I saw a couple other hands, Martha and Lynn, and I suspect there'll be a few others that may be interested. So this is an open invitation. We want to make sure everyone understands what we're looking at and that we can seek some alignment here. So thank you for continuing to bring this up. It is important and it is the role that you play. So with that, I am going to pivot us over to the breakout sessions. And as I mentioned, we are looking for an ability to provide feedback around the transit investments, the presentations that you've seen from Kelly, and really get your feedback as it relates to the values and priorities that the Community Advisory Group so familiar with. We are using this as kind of our framework as we move forward. There are many values listed on this, this slide here. This is kind of the same approach that we've been taking to each of those major components of that LPA. We want to utilize those breakout sessions with a facilitator and someone that takes notes. You know kind of how we do this, and then we're going to be looking for someone from the CAG to be able to report out. So we have about 20 minutes that we're going to head into this breakout group, and then 15 minutes to report out. And our co-chair Valenter will kind of go through and lead us through a bit of a debrief, but I just want to make sure all our members are tracking. We're going to be looking for a reporter. We also have some expertise like Kelly and other members of the IBR program team that will be embedded in each of those breakout rooms. I have mentioned in the past that we have a large group of partner agencies that are part of the program. They have been invited to participate. At this point, it doesn't look like we have additional partner agency representatives here, but if we do, we'll make sure that they're introduced in those breakout sessions so you know who they are in case they have any perspectives that they want to share as well. Okay, with that, I think we're ready for the magic to begin, where we all head into predetermined breakout rooms. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, Andrew, I am not sure why you didn't go to a room. Let me try to move you into one.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do you have the option to join a room? Is that showing up for you at all?
Oh, I'm on mute. This is Aaron here. Sorry. I do not see that. No, but is there anybody here who needs interpreters? Do you know?
No.
Okay, so we'll just go ahead and hang out until it's done. You said it's 20 minutes. Is that correct?
Yeah, 25. And
Okay.
I apologize, Andrew. I'm going to try to figure this out.
No worries. And my internet's been spotty, so it's I've been checking off a number of times.
Okay, so that might be it because I had you in a room. I know I saw your name, and then let's see. I'm taking over for Brent. He's on vacation, so I'm not sure how to move you to a room. So bear
Don't
with
worry,
me.
I can hang out here too.
Okay.
We can't have had a different timer than the others.
It's the efficiency of our traffic planning.
Zoom could sense that we solved it, and
we got from point A to point B in a record amount of time.
I bet the other groups are still waiting for the rundown of the clock. Oh, there they are.
Oh, there they are.
We got kicked out eventually. But Robin and Jennifer and I were like, we're not leaving until they kick us out. So we stayed, we closed it down.
That's what I used to do at the bars too, but don't do that anymore.
Lynn, I think we're heading it over to you to kind of lead us in this next section.
Sorry, all I can see is the ASL interpreter. I was fiddling with my views, trying to look at more than just her, even though it's lovely, but I don't do that. Thank you. Okay, now I can see a little bit more. So hopefully everybody noticed their group numbers. We didn't ask you to do that, but there are 4 of us, and I think it's important that we share out. I believe each facilitator had a Jamboard. And so as the reporting party speaks, maybe the person can put up the Jamboard for notes. So I don't know who was in group 1, but do we have a volunteer?
So group 1 was who was with me, but I'd love to have somebody from our group volunteer to talk about what we discussed, and we have some notes right here. Seeing no eager hands, I could certainly walk us through this. So as you can see, lots of great conversation. We had just from a very high level, broad perspective, we had a overwhelmingly large amount of support for light rail. We also showed some enthusiasm for and appreciation for Kelly, your presentation, and Vicky for you explaining that in any system that stays, that the City of Vancouver's express bus will accompany any high capacity transit system. So that consistent overlay is great to have. There's some thoughts on BRT, regardless of dedicated line or street, that there's always an opportunity or examples of buses slowing down. So again, light rail was thought of as the better option there. Let's see, freight perspective, the option that can best take automobiles off the road was shown to have interest. And then just forward thinking, predictive modeling, and also thinking about what is going to be a desire in 25, 30, 40 years down the road, so that what is built now can accommodate what the conditions are going to be in the future. And again, that lent itself to a light rail, that if we're going to build once, laying down track now versus trying to reconstruct or laying down track after the fact is tough. A need for some more data was asked about in terms of what, as I said, predictive modeling. And we know that the demand for transit is high. And that kind of covers it. If I've missed something, please speak up. But those were our high level conversations.
Thank you, Jason. I'm seeing thumbs up from some
Yeah.
of the team members. So
Great.
If I could ask group 2, I'm not sure if you selected a report out or default to
We
program
did.
staff. Oh, yay.
That's Irina.
Irina.
Yes.
Thank you. Irina, we're not hearing you, but you're not on mute, I don't think.
How about now?
Great. Thank you so much.
Good. I'm telling you, there is a special button I need to push every time we switch the rooms. And before it was happening automatically, now it's not. Okay. So we had very lovely discussion about how useful and how beneficial it is to have one seat going from Vancouver to downtown Portland. And then we kind of like touched almost all the same points that was mentioned in the first group. So I'm not going to repeat them. We had nice discussion about availability of park and rides. And what Greg mentioned, that neither downtown Portland nor downtown Vancouver are interested in setting park and rides within the city limits or within the downtown limits. And the Clark College isn't very excited to have a big park and ride either. So we were discussing that maybe some constraints in the modeling need to be applied to take this into account, because kind of like, what's the point of putting that much money into light rail that's great, that nobody wants to take because the parks and ride do not accommodate the vehicles. And then there was a good idea that, and good mentioning that Tesla owner and Tesla designer decided that there will be vehicles that do not need the driver, and they're kind of like pick, drive and drop. And maybe if that option will be available, then park and ride won't be needed. And so that was discussion in our group. So if somebody else wants to add, go ahead, but I'm done.
Thank you. Nicely reported, I think. We lost our Jamboard though. What do we?
I will just give a shout out that Ed did a great job of trying to land this in our group, and Irina had her consensus cards. So she was ready to go, which then also kind of got her set up to do the debrief as well. So thank you, Irina and Ed.
That's great.
Thanks, Irina.
I was a member of the third group, so I'll just report out, except I totally can't do it without a Jamboard. So we got to pop that back up. Thank you. I will say that we started off with one of the points that Kelly made really strongly, which was that express buses for those who are going from point to point are very efficient, and that we anticipate them staying, and there was a lot of support for that. The group also landed on LRT as supporting kind of our top priorities, but in conjunction with BRT, seemed like it made some sense. There was also concern that if we just take it to the waterfront, that's not really meeting some of the community's needs with regard to transport for, you know, work and other considerations. And another point was that the more people we can get out of single family vehicles, the better kind of for everybody else and for the environment. So we also spent a little bit of time just talking about I don't know if it's the politics, but maybe it's the realities of Clark County versus Vancouver, and how far into Clark County do we go? what is the tolerance of the community for how far north it goes. We were taking it up to Illinois and I don't know, maybe Seattle when I wasn't paying attention. But the point is there was widespread support for LRT, but we also understand that the community has divergent opinions on this, some of which date back to the 2013 program. And finally, when we were kind of puzzled a little bit about why we were talking about the Vine and BRT in this context, and kind of highlighted that it was a 2013, a change since the 2013 program. Sam, I think you had something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm sure ALNA would love to have light rail to go to their front door. So maybe they can help fund this.
Well, I put a plug in for WSU Vancouver too, because back in 2013, we were like, hey, yeah, we'll put a transit stop here. We would love to have an LRT stop. So anyway, I think that concludes my report. Do any of my other team members want to add anything that I didn't highlight maybe? Really good, thoughtful comments that are captured here. So with that, I will move to our fourth group, which to report out, and whoever's kind of leading this, you can just unmute and take it away.
All right. I didn't make any of you volunteer, so I will go ahead and report out on our conversation. So folks had some questions about what the assumptions were, whether there was an option for a lane to be high capacity transit during, say, the day versus a general purpose or freight lane in the evening, and clarified that that sort of thing was not being considered as part of this. But most folks tended to coalesce around light rail because of the greater ridership and also the lack of a need to transfer. If going from Vancouver down to Portland, you don't need to get off at Expo and switch. But that wasn't everybody, because there were questions about the data and whether there's going to be actually demand to have that level of ridership that the model said there would be, and how that relates to how tolls are considered in that analysis. And so that'll certainly impact what the best decision is there. And yeah, I think we talked about, the assumption that there will be bus on shoulder was a good thing. I think that, and also a consideration that down the road, and this could play in, is that basically all fleets are going to be, of all vehicles are going to be electrifying, and that includes bus. And so just something that we should be thinking about through this. Anything I missed, group?
Okay. I just want to thank everyone and also just call out a pattern. You all have probably discerned this and don't need me to say it, but I'm good at redundancy, so I'm going to go there. What we're seeing presentations on some of these very complicated issues. And as Greg told us, we're not getting into huge detail, but kind of a medium.
So those are all locked.
Kind of a medium to high level of detail. And then we have a little bit of time to think about it and maybe review documents, talk to our stakeholders, and then we're coming back and providing input and feedback to the program team. So I just want to highlight that this is like how we're rolling with CAG. We all know we have a deadline that we're working toward, but now we're going to move to the next phase of that, where we get to have, I think, our first kind of technical presentation, if you will, on auxiliary lanes. And Ryan LaCrosse is going to present that for us and let us know kind of what's what. So Ryan, I don't see you, but I'm going on faith here.
I'm on here, Lynn.
Okay,
You see me
great.
now? Perfect.
There you go. Yep. Once you start talking, you jump to the top. So
There you
thank
go. I was off screen, so I turned myself on screen. I'll start talking. So as Lynn mentioned, Ryan LaProuse, I'm the transportation planning lead for the IBR program. I'm here today to kind of give a initial introduction to auxiliary lanes. So I've got kind of three parts in my presentation. I'm going to kind of go over baseline traffic and safety information related to I-5. Some of this data I think in December and explained some of the existing kind of current conditions for all modes, but today I'm kind of focusing more on I-5 kind of traffic and safety. I'll then define what are aux lanes, what do they do, how do they work, and then get into some initial auxiliary lane analysis and what we'll be doing over the what we've kind of been completing, and we'll come back next meeting and kind of give some initial results. So next slide, please. So again, starting off with traffic and background information. So I'll orient us all. So this is our IBR program area. We've got 7 interchanges in our 5 miles. Desirable interchange spacing is 2 miles with a minimum standard about 1 mile. As you can see, all of our interchange distances between our interchanges, with starting at SR 500 on the right with the dot, they're all less than a mile. So most of them are actually around about a half mile. So a lot of interchanges closely spaced in our program area. Next slide. So I want to start off with, so we use 2019 as kind of our existing conditions. We've got a big transportation network in our area that's very diverse. Got freeways, highways, local roads, transit, and active transportation systems. So we collected kind of current data in 2019, and then we supplemented that with some additional information in 2021. The reason we're using 2019 as a baseline is due to the unknown influence from kind of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we didn't want to use that as our base. We kind of went back to pre-COVID pandemic timeframe, which is consistent with WSDOT, ODOT, FHWA, FTA practices to use kind of pre-pandemic volumes and to kind of set as your baseline information, because we don't really understand all of the trends and how they'll change in the future for forecasting. So next slide. This shows, I think I've showed this in December, but kind of historical volumes on the I-5 bridge and the I-205 bridge. So the interstate bridge is the blue kind of box there on the bottom, showing 143,000, a little over 143,000 in 2019. We have the Glenn Jackson Bridge as our 2 main river crossings in the Portland Metro region, which is about 170,000. You can see we're up to about 313,000 total river crossing in 2019. This is an increase over what was kind of collected during the previous planning on the program when we were back in the 2005 timeframe. So it's about 12% over those 14 years, which is a little less than 1% per year, which is average kind of conditions, kind of what's typical for freeways. As more people are going to work, more people kind of are living in the area. So that's kind of a typical standard, and our program is kind of following that and seeing those similar trends. Next slide, please. So what this is showing is kind of our hourly flow rates. I know it's kind of tough to see, but on the left is kind of a 24-hour profile. This is just showing northbound, but this is all vehicles, including freight. You can kind of see in the off-peak overnight hours, you kind of less than 1,000 vehicles an hour. This is total at the I-5 bridge. You can kind of see it increasing in the AM, and then the PM peak is where the peak direction is in the northbound. It's right around about 5,000 kind of people an hour are traveling across the bridge. This is how much volume can be served on the I-5 bridge. The right graph is kind of showing freight and how freight peaks. So it peaks differently than vehicles. Freight tries to avoid the AM or PM peak when they can. They cannot always do that, unfortunately, due to delivery schedules, but they try to, and this is kind of showing how those patterns are trying to miss the congestion and those kind of peak travel periods. And that's what's kind of showing, but you're going to see the volumes and their relative scale in comparison to overall all vehicles on the slide on the graph on the left. The important, real quick, go back to the one for me for 1 minute, Jason. So the other thing of note, I had some other slides, but we kind of were trying to trim things down. So I've got some speaking points for you. So freight has actually increased to about 14,000 of those 143,000 vehicles. It's about 14,000 trips on a weekday travel across our bridge. So it's about 10%, which is an increase from previous planning. It was only about 8%. So you're kind of seeing the increase in freight importance. I-205 also increased, but I-205's volumes are only about 6.5% on a daily basis. I-5 has both ports. It has the industrial areas on both the north and south side of the river that are very important and trip generators for our system. Next slide, please. So what this pattern and this graph is trying to show is how many people are using our bridge and what ramps are they using. So we've kind of got different trips. So there's kind of 4 lines here showing kind of a through to through is kind of the turquoise. We've got a red line that people enter at one of our ramps in our program area north of the river and extend all the way south on I-5. You've got the dark blue that starts outside of our program area and exits at one of our ramps inside our program area. And then the final one there is our turquoise kind of line that shows everybody who enters and exits. So what you can see from this is about 85% of our 85% of the users are using one of our interchanges in our program area. So they either get on and or off one of our 7 interchanges. Only about 15% are going all the way through from north of SR 500 all the way south of Victory on I-5 and staying as kind of a through trip. So a lot of interactions, lots of users are getting on and off at some of these 7 interchanges. Next graphic, please. So this is a similar case, but this is the opposite direction. This is looking northbound in the PM peak, similar kind of story. So about 75%. So only 25% are going through to through. So south of Victory, all the way north of SR 500. So very important to see how many people are getting on and off at these ramps. And you saw earlier how closely spaced they were. So a lot of people using those interchanges. Next, I'm going to go and show kind of volumes. So I know the slide's kind of small, but I think everybody got this information sent out to you. So what we're showing here is an AM peak 1 hour. I'd like to kind of orient and get everybody kind of understanding the volumes that are using these ramps today. This is existing AM peak hour. You got northbound on the right-hand side, southbound on the left-hand side of the graph. The graphs are showing off ramps in dark blue, on ramps kind of in turquoise. You can kind of see those volumes as they enter and exit at ramps in our kind of program area corridor. We also have the black kind of numbers in black that show mainline volumes. So they're at the top kind of our program area across the river at the bridge and then south of our program area. So we're trying to show you relative scale of those volumes, and those arrows are to scale, kind of showing the higher ramps get a larger arrow and the smaller ramps with lower volumes have kind of lower, kind of smaller arrows. Important to note here, you kind of see some of the critical ones. Southbound AM is our peak period. You see about 2,000 people coming on at SR 539th, kind of at the north end of the program area. You see kind of Mill Plain coming on about 1,500. You see SR 14 coming on at about 1,000. These are 1 or 2 lane ramps and volumes that come on at those locations. So I'll explain aux lanes a little later and kind of show you what that means and what occurs with all that entering and exiting flow. And when you go south of the river, you can see Marine Drive volume. There's about 1,800 people getting off in an hour. These are 1 hour volumes, and then interstate Denver Victory ramps about 1,000. So you lose a lot of volume at these ramps just north and south of the Columbia River. Next slide, please. And next, I will show you kind of the PM peaks. This is PM peak 1 hour again. Northbound are the arrows on the right-hand side of I-5. Southbound are the left-hand side again. Northbound PM peak that's the peak period, peak direction. So that's the majority of my focus. So I'll kind of walk us through so you can kind of see the interstate flows. Marine Drive about 1,500, 1,700 is very high truck volumes. We also have the truck percentages next to all these numbers, kind of showing you that information. North of the river, you could see the SR 14 on-ramp actually kind of being a pretty heavy flow. People coming in from East Vancouver, accessing I-5 to head north. You then have the SR Mill Plain, 4th Plain combined off-ramp, Mill Plain on-ramp about 1,500, and then our SR 500 there at the top, about 2,000 people exiting at SR 500. So a lot of state routes with SR 500, SR 14, a lot of state routes as well, or kind of highways of Mill Plain in Vancouver, as well as Marine Drive as kind of a state route in Oregon. Of notice, I know there's a lot of information on here, but some of the, well, I mentioned most of the flows are peak period, peak direction. So northbound PM, southbound AM. There are some ramps and that actually peak in the off-peak. A good example of this is SR14 southbound off-ramp on I-5 actually peaks at almost 1,500 vehicles per hour in the PM peak, where it's about 12 or 1,000 in the AM peak. So we got a design for different flows, different origin and destination patterns. So a lot of ramps accessing in our kind of near our program area. So the next slide, please. And I think we're taking questions at the end, right, Lynn? Is the way? Thank you. Okay, so I'll just kind of keep rolling through this. Maybe I'll stop.
May interrupt just because sometimes we need to understand what we're seeing, but I think, yeah, keep rolling and.
Yeah, I might stop at the main.
Group.
Yeah, at the main sections, I might just stop and see if there's questions on kind of these main topical points as kind of a way. So of note here is kind of there's 3 bottlenecks kind of in our program area. 2 of them are at the bridge. So got a northbound and southbound. The northbound I-5 bottleneck lasts for 7 hours from 12:30 to 7:30. Remember those freight flows I showed earlier where freight's trying to drive outside that peak, miss that peak. They can't always do that. Here's a good example of that. They're kind of caught up in that same peak. You saw their peak flows were kind of in the middle of the day. They're hitting this kind of midday congestion impacting commerce and stuff like that. So southbound, we have a bottleneck at the bridge that lasts about 3.5 hours, 6 to 9:30 a.m. We also have a bottleneck south of the project area in Portland, kind of between the I-5, I-405 Rose Quarter area that backs up and impacts the program area. So it kind of lasts about 4 hours in the morning period. We've also got other bottlenecks outside, they're kind of in Portland, but this one actually influences the program area. So those are the 3 main bottlenecks we have. Next, I will go to safety. So you can slide to safety for me. Perfect. So we collected, as I mentioned, kind of new data. So for safety data, we collected 5 years worth of data. We had 2015 to 2019. There was over 1,800 crashes on the main line and on the ramps on those 5-year period. This graphic is trying to show you, we summarized those crashes by 1/4 mile segments and kind of plotted them. Northbound PM is on the right-hand side, southbound northbound crashes are on the right, southbound crashes are on the left. These are all-day crashes. You can kind of see the larger the circle, the more crashes that are occurring at those locations. So in the northbound, you can see how it's kind of approaching the bridge. The circles start getting larger, and you're going to see the substandard merges that are occurring at those locations at Hayden Island. Same type of thing for the southbound. You got big kind of circles. As you get closer to the bridge, you also have them in other locations between SR 500 and kind of mill plane SR 14 that are quite large. The circles summarize graphs, summarize the crashes by different colors. So the orange is kind of showing you our rear end collisions. We have side swipe crashes, which is about 20%. The orange rear end collisions are about 55% of our total collisions, which is kind of related to congested conditions. Side swipe, which is about 20%, which is the blue, I think. No, sorry. Side swipe is yellow. I just zoom in on myself. The yellow crashes, those are kind of related to the short merges and weaves. We then have the fixed object crashes, which are kind of the blue in the pies. And then you kind of see where those kind of relate. Those have to do with some kind of substandard design. And then we've lumped all the other crashes into kind of the green on the plots, which is almost 10%. We did also summarize this information by severity. So this one here is just showing by type. We also have the severity collisions for that same 5-year period. And while most of them, the majority of them were property damage only, there were 7 fatal crashes and 17 serious injury crashes in that 5-year period. Next slide. So kind of some of to summarize this section of data, the following features are all kind of contribute to the high number of crashes and crash rate in the program area. Those are those short merges, diverges, and weaving sections that kind of exist within our program area. The presence and duration of congestion and congested traffic conditions, and then bridge lifts and traffic stops. I didn't get into that today, but I've given that story before. We collected information for the same 5-year period, 2015 to 2019, on bridge lifts, and there's about 325 kind of bridge lifts a year, so almost 1 per day. They're not allowed during the peak, AM peak and PM peak 2.5-hour period, but they're allowed in the shoulder kind of period and impact vehicles and crashes as well. So I think I will stop there and see if there are questions on kind of current data and kind of our current baseline conditions.
While people are absorbing that, I just want to thank you and your profession, because if we all had to look at all of that data in numerical, like little Excel charts, Excel cells, we'd all be dying. And so I think your profession has really elevated itself to try and provide it graphically so that people who aren't skilled at this can understand it. I do want to call my colleagues' attention to the fact that the turn ratios with the sizes and colors and things, those percentages are the percentages of trips that are freight. At first, I thought they were percentages of the total trips at that time. And so if you read further, you see that. But anyway, thank you. Great data. Do we have questions though at this point? If not, we can keep going. As you know, as long as we have time, we can take questions, but we can continue to the ramp to ramp connections discussion and then throw it open as well. I sense that's the will of the group, so please proceed. Thank you.
I feel that's where we wanted to get to anyway, so let's get into the kind of the definition. So now I'm going to kind of define auxiliary lanes or ramp to ramp connections. People kind of call them both things. So let's go to the next slide. So here is a kind of picture of it. I'm going to define it. So ramp to ramp connections are they facilitate acceleration, deceleration, weaving, merging, and diverging for automobiles and trucks between two or more interchanges. We have kind of a graphic here shown. We have a video I'll get into next that kind of explains that a little better than me. So I'll save my voice and just kind of show you. There's a picture on top there without aux lanes. There's a picture on the bottom with aux lanes. And then there's pictures of current conditions in the Portland metro region where they exist without aux lanes, what has to happen, and with aux lanes, how it kind of works. So we have a video to show you. So let's go to that, Jason, if we can. We cannot hear it, Jason.
Can you not hear it?
No.
No. All right.
I think you got to share when you hit the share.
Yeah. 1 second. I've done that earlier today. All right.
The Interstate Bridge provides a critical connection between Oregon and Washington that supports local jobs and families and is a vital trade route for regional, national, and international economies. With over 143,000 vehicles crossing the Interstate Bridge each weekday, the area experiences 7 to 10 hours of congestion, affecting commuters, freight transportation, and public transit. Additionally, the area's current crash rate is over 3 times higher than statewide averages, with collisions resulting not just in fender benders, but fatalities as well. One of the factors that contributes to safety issues and congestion in the Interstate Bridge area is the lack of auxiliary lanes across the bridge and near the surrounding interchanges. Without auxiliary lanes, drivers are forced into through lanes to slow down or speed up as they are entering or exiting the roadway, slowing traffic down and increasing the chance of collisions. Auxiliary lanes are short lanes designed to give drivers distance to accelerate or decelerate before entering or exiting the roadway. They are not through lanes and are not the same as adding an additional lane. They are connections that reduce bottlenecks and optimize traffic flow by giving drivers space to merge safely. This allows for more efficient movement through the corridor, improving safety, helping to relieve congestion with better traffic flow, and reducing emissions from idling vehicles. There are currently 7 closely spaced interchanges in the Interstate Bridge area along I-5. While the standard spacing for these kinds of interchanges is 2 miles, these interchanges are all less than a mile apart, resulting in substantial weaving and merging for drivers. Auxiliary lanes are currently being used within the program area, such as along Mill Plain and 4th Plain in Vancouver and Marine Drive in Portland. However, they do not exist on or near the bridge where a majority of congestion and collisions occur. The Interstate Bridge is a vital piece of infrastructure for our community and the economy. It is imperative that we do everything possible to improve the safety of our roads for everyone.
Perfect. Save my voice. I appreciate it. So let's go. So this is kind of showing where they exist today. So we already have kind of, as the video mentioned, There are auxiliary lanes in our program area today. They just don't exist across the bridge. So on the north is to the right, still lost our north arrow. We'll add our north arrow to the right, but kind of SR 500 is on the right-hand side, kind of working your way to the left, kind of gets you to Victory Boulevard. You can see in Vancouver, there are sections where there are one or actually two auxiliary lanes. That has to do with the volume and the short interchange spacing. As I mentioned, SR 500 brings on over 2,000 vehicles an hour coming out at that location. It's less than a half a mile getting off the fourth plane. So it brings on 2 lanes. It drops one at fourth plane, for example. That's kind of how an aux lane works. You then pick up another lane there at fourth plane, drop both of them at middle plane, and then kind of continue down the system. So there are auxiliary lanes located between SR 500 and middle plane, kind of currently 1 or 2. You've got between middle plane and SR 14, there's an aux lane. And then south of the river between Hayden Island and Marine Drive, as well as between Marine Drive and Victory Boulevard, you have 1 auxiliary lane that kind of exists and help with those short ramp interchange spacing and high volumes. So this is where they exist today. As I mentioned, they exist throughout the Portland metro region as well. There's locations down in downtown Portland, other locations in Vancouver where you add a lane coming on an on ramp and you drop a lane at the next off ramp. So next slide. So when we're designing and coming up with design considerations for the IBR program, we're looking at how to address these multiple issues, including traffic congestion, which I kind of explained. There's 10 hours congestion at the bridge. We've got the interchange spacing not allowing for adequate time for vehicles to make on and off decisions. We have high on and off ramp volumes. I'll give you a few examples at SR 500, middle plane, SR 14, kind of north of the river, south of the river. You got Marine Drive, Interstate Victory. You got conflicts between through regional and local traffic. As I mentioned and showed you kind of the arrows, lots of traffic is entering and or exiting at our interchanges near the river. We got freight requirements, we got heavy volumes, we got freight destinations of both Port of Portland and Port of Vancouver with the mill plane interchange, with the Marine Drive interchange. You got kind of their origin destination patterns, as well as the grades that they have to deal with. Crashes caused by these short merging weaving distances, resulting in idling vehicles and increased emissions. We've got diversion to parallel roads that we're trying to deal with. So you've got MLK, Interstate Avenue, south of the river. You got Main Street, north of the river, that are kind of being used as parallel arterials to avoid congestion on I-5. Transit currently sits in the general purpose lanes, same as, and it's caught up in the same backups as vehicles are, so that same 10 hours congestion. C-Tran has added some bus on shoulder systems north of the kind of bridge to kind of try to help facilitate that where there are shoulders that is being used. And as you heard earlier from Kelly, bus on shoulder is included with all of the scenarios in our kind of transit options. We got limited active transportation facilities. We got about 4 feet of bike and ped kind of shoulders, kind of systems across the river. And then we've got to worry about maintenance of traffic kind of during construction. So how many lanes will remain open during construction is a consideration in the design. So let's go to the next slide. So I'll stop there on the definition, see if anybody had any questions on the definition of aux lanes, how they work, where they are. Okay, I'll keep rolling. So next, I will speed up as well. So you guys have seen your CAG values and priorities. I think this was on a slide earlier as well. So a lot of these have to do with kind of all modes, but we're here today to talk about aux lanes. So these next few slides get into purpose and need are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the left-hand side. We then have the desired outcomes that kind of come from our project partners as well as our community working groups. And we've kind of highlighted some of the ones that are related to auxiliary lanes, so we can skip past these. A lot of these have to do with congestion and giving people options and safety, so we can keep rolling through these quickly. So I wanted to get to the, keep going. So what are auxiliary lanes and why are they proposed and what are they proposed to address for the IBR program? So it's the close interchange spacing, as I mentioned. Most of ours or all of ours are less than a mile. A lot of them are actually around a half mile. We have those short merges, weaves, and diverges. An example of this is the northbound Hayden Island on-ramp. I'm sure many of us have experienced that. That on-ramp has 150 feet of acceleration. Current standard is 1,500 feet. What happens is a lot of vehicles will enter and, as you saw in the video, somebody's got to move over, and right there at the bridge, a lot of vehicles can't move over, so somebody ends up stopping. And it's a huge safety concern and issue for us that we're trying to solve with the IBR program. We got high on and off ramp volumes, as I mentioned. SR 500 is over 2,000 vehicles per hour. Marine Drive is another good example for us. We got 1,800 vehicles per hour, kind of in that range. Freight's actually up to 20% at that ramp, so important for us to understand. We got the crashes I went through earlier that are kind of showing you where their substandard merge, diverge, and weaving areas are. And then we've got lane balancing, which is kind of a proper arrangement of traffic lanes on a freeway to realize efficient traffic operations by minimizing the required number of lane shifts. So when you have heavy on-ramp volumes coming on or off ramps, you try to add or drop lanes at those specific locations so you don't have to force a lot of weaving maneuvers to occur. So next slide, please. So for the future, forecasting, as Kelly mentioned in her presentation earlier, we're looking out at 2045. So the travel demand modeling helps us forecast the future kind of volumes. It takes into account the land use, population, and employment that is assumed for the region at that time. So it projects future demand and those origin destination patterns, as well as mode choice. So it also, as we mentioned earlier in our presentation, it includes other projects and planned improvements that are planned for 2045. So we have a no build and build condition that we're analyzing kind of with our IBR programs. Next slide. So for the screening, we have assumed what's in the 2018 Regional Transportation Plan as kind of the basis for modeling. So that assumed high capacity transit being LRT to Clark College, included 3 park and rides. We had 2 auxiliary lanes across the interstate bridge. We had a full Hayden Island interchange, and we had variable toll rates were assumed as part of that modeling, with higher during the peak period and lower during the off-peak period. This was done just for initial volume forecasting to help us with our screening. We will be updating this based off decisions over the next few weeks and next few months as we get into the environmental phase of the IBR. So next slide. So here I wanted to explain kind of the different options that we're looking at. So the top scenario is kind of our no build condition. Again, similar to today, no real changes in our program areas. The same number of aux lanes, north and south, still occur. We've developed 2 auxiliary lane options, a one aux lane option. You can see across the river, there is an additional auxiliary lane. The 4th lane is kind of added there in the turquoise. You then see up in Vancouver, where you add 1 or 2 kind of between SR 14 and SR 500, highlighted there with the turquoise being the 4th lane, the dark blue adding the 5th lane, very similar to today's conditions, helping with some of those short interchange spacing. So that's kind of the 1 aux lane scenario. And then we have a 2 auxiliary lane scenario, which is a little bit different. Has similar conditions up in Vancouver. It adds that 2nd lane just across the bridge. So it picks it up from Marine Drive, drops it at kind of the mill plane in both directions, and then kind of adds back in the auxiliary lane kind of in the Portland area. These assumptions assume kind of decisions at Hayden Island with the partial interchange. There's some braided ramps that are kind of occurring in those locations, but these are sample scenarios for now. The main difference here is just kind of across the river. You can see the 1 aux lane. So there's 4 lanes in each direction, and the 1 aux lane scenario across the river. You can see it quickly adds and drops just on both edges of the river for the most part. And then the other option adds that 5th lane for that same kind of short segment, and then fills in the brackets a little bit on the other pieces to kind of help with all the heavy weaving, merging and diverging between our short interchange spacing. Next slide. This is, I think, is my last one. So this kind of gets into some of the metrics, some of the transportation metrics that we'll be summarizing and kind of come back to you guys with in the next few weeks. So congestion, kind of hotspot locations. So we kind of showed you, we've got 3 bottlenecks today. So we're going to try to get into where those locations are at. We're going to get into freeway ramps that are impacted by congestion and identify those locations. Get into kind of summarizing annual crashes, volumes on I-5, I-205. Important one here, we'll get into mode split, try to get into modal information. So vehicles versus transit users who cross the river with the IBR program. Travel time information, as Tom kind of asked about earlier, we're looking at travel time information, cost, some environmental measures, including VMT and GHG, might be kind of qualitative at this time, and some equity measures as well that kind of trying to using this transportation information to help tell the story between the difference between a no build, a 1 auxiliary lane, and a 2 auxiliary lane scenario. That's it for me, Jason. I think I'll open myself up for questions. I'm sure there are some.
Sarah, I see your hand up.
There you go. Can you hear me?
We can. It may not be super clear, but keep going and I'll let you know.
Okay.
I think you're still sharing, Jason.
Yeah. Sorry, Jason. So my question is about auxiliary lanes, which look amazing from a commuter standpoint. I would love to have as many lanes as possible. But that's going to increase the size of the footprint of the bridge, right? How much is it going to increase the footprint? And is that going to be a problem for residents and businesses who are really close to the bridge?
So those designs are still being determined. The footprint across the bridge, you saw, we're trying, we've got to fit back into the I-5 corridor on both sides of the river. So there's some maintenance kind of during construction. How do you maintain traffic? How do you keep traffic open? You still have to kind of keep the cut. The designs are similar within the right of way, kind of north and south. There are some different additions. It's kind of how you balance the design. So I don't have a design graphic here I can get into, unfortunately, with you, Sarah, very well, but we're looking at that, trying to limit the impacts to kind of right of way stuff. So that's my simple answer for now, but we can come back and kind of give you a more detailed one next time, hopefully with some pictures to support it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Tom Hickey?
Yeah, can you talk about how the auxiliary lanes function with the stacked bridge option? And how is that different than if it was the flat bridge?
So I wasn't prepared for that, Tom. I don't think they're really that different. The stacked has kind of 2 levels and puts you on 2 levels for traffic. One direction's on one level, another direction's on the other level versus the 2 bridge. Everything's on the same level. So you got to get to grade and things like that, but there's not really a difference with the aux lanes in terms of how the number that you can have or the design of them. So there is.
You just have to have a longer climb to get up to that upper level.
So I think it's the grade. I think it's, I don't think it actually extends the climb length. I think they just kind of raise the grade a little bit differently, but I think the height is actually the same in them. So I'll let my design team come back and answer your technical design question for you.
Okay. Thank you.
Irina?
I have a question about the cost of option 2 and option 3. On the ballpark, which one is more expensive and how much?
We will have to get back to you, Irina. We are still working out those details. So I don't want to throw a number out right now.
I'm going to take the liberty then, since I don't see another hand, of kind of asking you to expand a little bit for those of us who don't do traffic analysis day to day. It seems to me that aux lanes are kind of the core of what's going to determine travel times and congestion. If we've already set on 3 lanes each way, then really the secret weapon isn't right because it's not secret, but your kind of weapon of choice is aux lanes. And so how do you decide, like, my guess is that the option with 1 auxiliary lane mitigates some, but I've got to think the option with 2 auxiliary lanes is maybe the technically desirable solution if you're trying to maximize traffic, but then you have other restrictions. But might you just provide some bigger picture context about aux lanes? And I also think your point that you made earlier about it being critical for safety is absolutely core to the project. So I think safety, we all understand significantly, but if you might address anything I'm overlooking there, but then also just from your perspective, like when do you use aux lanes? Why would you and why wouldn't you?
Yeah, it's a good lead in, Lynn. So aux lanes are a tool. There are other tools, collector distributor roads is another tool, braided ramps is another tool. Aux lanes are a very good feature for short interchange spacing with high volumes. That's what they're trying to do, is help you kind of get up to speed as you saw in the video, because a lot of other examples where you just force people in, they have to just force their way in, and traffic either on the main line has to slow, speed up. So that's kind of occur, and lots of people are used to examples of those in the Portland metro region where you got short, and they were, too standard at that time. Standards have kind of been changed, got a high speed. So you're trying to solve those issues with aux lanes. Aux lanes is a very good tool. The reason we've kind of showing those with different pieces and where they're adding is kind of related to volume. So it's related to volumes, it's related to the spacing. So we've got too many interchanges, unfortunately. And, they're all very important is the big deal. You got state routes, you got port access, you got Hayden Island. That's the only access to the islands, from the interchange. So there's a lot of reason why they're there. And a typical tool that is used out of the toolbox from us transportation engineers is auxiliary lanes.
And are the restrictions primarily budget and kind of footprint, the need to exercise eminent domain or something, or what are the restrictions? I've got to think if, traffic analysis 101 probably says what you're really shooting for is this, and the reason we can't get there is often compounded by these other factors.
Yeah, it's that, as well as the one I struggled on there with lane balance. I don't want to get into too much lane balance with people, but you have freeway to freeway. So like SR 500 is it's a freeway to freeway. You can add 2 lanes from a state route. People understand it's coming from a state route. It's heavy volume. It's, access controlled. There's reasons for it. You don't want to just go to 3 or 4 or 5 aux lanes. You got to bring on a correct number of aux lanes at correct locations that have to do with volumes and, that lane balancing issue, which is very difficult to explain. To kind of tell you where you should do it and where you should drop them at. It's kind of, a tool that's used. So the other thing I did want to point out, which I kind of missed on my auxiliary lane kind of a comparison, is in the 1 aux lane and the 2 aux lane, all of those include high capacity transit, and all of those include kind of demand management pieces, with tolling. So those are all kind of inclusive in those scenarios. So there's a lot of management being done. You don't want to just continue to widen, forever. Right, Lynn? So you're trying to balance the system. We also have to tie back into 3 lanes north of the project area and 3 lanes south of the project area is kind of our connection. So you don't want to kind of widen the pipe. A lot of this has to do, kind of think of transportation engineering as, kind of water engineering is very similar. So.
And so I apologize for background noise. I'm actually walking on the bridge. And the one other argument that is going on about additional auxiliary lanes is there's a set of folks who believe that if you build a bigger bridge, you will induce more traffic to use it. So not everybody agrees with that assessment, but that is an argument that is out there, that if we solve congestion, more people will be induced to use this bridge.
Well, Greg, thank you for that, because it is important for us to understand other people's perspectives. If we're going to represent our community, I think, we need to understand what the counterpoint, because it did kind of feel like aux lanes were the magic sauce that would help us get there without having to overbuild, as it were. But okay, sorry, I've been talking a lot. Other questions from Bill? Thank you.
I wasn't going to ask the question because you just barely touched on it at the end, but maybe you could expand a little bit on how it does fit with the high capacity transit that we just discussed. How do you get the trains and or buses off I can tell on the buses, but the trains are going to have some kind of tracks going through those auxiliary lanes to get off of a exit. At least that's what I can think of.
Yeah, so they're actually, again, a map would help us. They're kind of in their own high capacity transit corridor, Bill. So they kind of are grade separated or kind of separate, and then they come into their own level on the bridge, on the two bridge or on the stack. They're on a parallel kind of separate of it. They're actually in their own area. So they're their own system, if you imagine. So they'll kind of not even interact. Buses, same with the BRT. But the express buses that I think, as people kind of discussed earlier, that'll be on the shoulder, will be interacting with this, and they'll come on in locations depending on their actual routing and then work their way over to the shoulder as needed.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Hickey?
Yeah, me again, I'm doing a lot of talking too. So am I wrong in thinking that an auxiliary lane can only exist from one interchange to the next? If you carry it on through, then it's a through lane. If you cross over an interchange to the next one beyond that?
No, that's so the definition. I had the one slide there, Tom, that so they can go beyond one interchange. A lot of the pictures we showed, it comes on at one and gets off at the next one. A good example of that is SR 500 southbound today, brings on 2 lanes. It drops 1 lane at 4th plane. It carries the 2nd lane through. It picks up a new 2nd auxiliary lane at 4th plane and drops 2 lanes at middle plane. So there's an example of it going beyond one interchange. They absolutely can go beyond one. They're trying to help you with lane balance and flows and kind of drop it kind of critical points. So they occur in Portland, in Vancouver, and other locations where they extend beyond one interchange.
Okay, thanks.
I can pretty much guarantee that all of us will be paying attention differently when we drive, for those of us that drive, as we go throughout Portland in this next week or two.
There you go. I tried to help. So look at the little, they have a little sign up as well that shows you when it's a add lane or when it merges in. They always put those up so you can kind of see those. So trying to educate today so everybody can be transportation engineers after today.
That's great. And before I call on my co-chair, Ed, I do want to just acknowledge that Patrick Sweeney with the City of Portland joined us a little bit later, and I didn't acknowledge that earlier, as Lisa had promised that we would. So Patrick, thank you for joining us, and we appreciate it. And then Ed, if you have a question.
I just have just want to say, Ryan, thank you very much for your excellent presentation. And I think that I'm glad I don't have your job. I say that with all compliments to you, but your pictures, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. And seeing your pictures today, thanks for the hard work. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
Really well done. Looking at the time, I do want to make sure that we have sufficient time for any public commenters, but at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Lisa, who's going to tell us what's up next. So thank you, Ryan. Really, really helpful information. And I hope that all of us will go look at the materials, because his materials were distributed to us. So if you couldn't decipher some of the graphics, you might want to take a peek and refresh your memory. But I'll stop talking. Lisa, thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. The last bulletin I received was that we do not have public comment, but we want to make sure that we allow for space in case there's anyone that is deciding to call in real quick here. And we do have some what's next directions that we want to share. So the program design scenarios discussion is planned upcoming, and a revision to our summer schedule. So we have asked a lot of you, 3 hours, 2 meetings a month for a couple months now. We have a real big push right now where we want to make sure that the program is reaching out to the community, that we're having conversations and getting feedback from you. And so we also want to give you a little bit of a break this summer. So please do not anticipate 2 meetings a month, and we might slow down even a little bit more, but it's really important that we're getting your feedback right now. So that's what's next. We have all of our typical advisory group meetings. Again, the community advisory group is not the only one that's being asked to meet more than once this month. So you'll see the equity advisory group, our executive steering group, again, our community advisory group, executive steering group, and community advisory group. So again, we really appreciate all of the time that you are dedicating to this work, and there is an open invitation. I know not everyone is able to attend the full meeting, and sometimes you're not able to even attend the meeting because we've added some. Jason, Johnell, and I, Lynn and Ed, we all will make ourselves available to follow up, answer questions, debrief with you if there is any questions that you might have, or any comments you want to share. Okay, next slide. Public comment, which happens to be right at the perfect time. We do have someone that wants to share. Sam, I see your hand up. I do want to see if there's any quick comments that you might want to make, and we'll head into the public comment.
Yeah, just the previous slide. I thought we started at 3 at the next meeting. Did it change back to 4?
I see Jason's face. I think it might have been an accident. Yes,
Oh, okay.
3 p.m.
Sure. I want to show up on time. Thank you.
3 p.m. Yes, 3
Yes.
p.m. Trust your meeting notice too. So 3 p.m., 3 to 6. All right. So it is that time for public comment. And let me just make sure that, Jason, do you need me to read the directions again? I don't see that someone has called in.
Lauren or Bernie,
Yeah.
help us get our public commenter in, and I will put up the slides for Lisa for you to read the instructions real quickly.
Okay. All right. Oh, I do see our public commenter. Okay, so to make a live comment via phone, these instructions are on our YouTube posting of our community advisory group, but I will read just briefly. Dial in number 1-669-900-6833, meeting ID 993-5459-6043, passcode 674942. We ask that you dial *9 to raise your hand. I will call on participants to provide comment. Dial *6 to unmute yourself, and please provide your name and affiliation. Jason will also be able to showcase a 2-minute clock. At that 2-minute mark, I'll gently nudge you to wrap up your feedback, and then we will move to the next commenter. So right now, we do have one individual that would like to make a comment. The phone number ends in 4141. So please introduce yourself and welcome to the Community Advisory Group meeting.
Hello? Hello?
Hi there.
Am
We
I
can
on?
hear you. Yes.
Oh, hi. My name is Peter Stark. I represent a number of commercial properties in the Hayden Island area and a number of property owners. I appreciated Tom Hickey's earlier comments about the concerns of the intersection. And I also want to point out the beginning of the meeting under the CAG Hayden Island Marine Drive feedback. Item 4 was keeping the commercial freight industry up to date. Hearing their concerns should be ongoing. I'd like to push that a little bit further. I think that we really need to make it a major component of the design. Freight and commercial movement to and from Hayden Island is critical to the 3,000 industrial jobs and 22,000 jobs that are on Hayden Island. And some of the businesses just won't survive unless they can get some of the bigger rigs on the island. And so, those the number of roundabouts, the strange kind of methodology to get to the island from the Oregon side, I'm hoping that the engineers will take into account that from an economic point of view, the impact to Hayden Island could be significant. So I'm really just calling in to say, first of all, I understand it's a complex problem. But I don't want, you know, even though Hayden Island is relatively small from an employment point of view, those businesses are critical to the people that work there. And that was really about it.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate your feedback and invite you to continue to share your feedback with us as we continue to move forward. Thank you. All right. I think that maybe Bernie, unless there's anyone else that you know of that is calling in, that's the only one I see on the screen.
Yes, that is the one public comment we have for today.
Okay. Thank you so much, Bernie. All right. Well, I think it is that point of the meeting where it's time for our co-chair Washington to wrap us on up.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to just thank everybody that participated, all the staff and all the co-chair, all the CAG members. I think this has been one of the most informative meetings we've had, but it was good information that I think will put us in a position to move forward. Lynn, thank you for your excellent work and also the presentation. And Johnell, Lisa, Greg, thank you all. So everybody have a wonderful, I'm sorry.
Jason.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. And Jason. My apologies, Jason. But thank you all for everything. Great meeting. So I'll go out and have a strong cup of coffee and we'll see you next time around, okay? Good night.
Hey, everybody.